could reconvene an open work session for our legislative session 2018-11 for June 1st, 2018.
So moved.
Second.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
The item on the agenda for today is the fiscal year 2019 budget recap. I remind you, this is a work session. I think the first thing that needs to be noted is that we spent about a solid week going over, in the last work session, reviewing what the perceived current amount of property tax revenue should be. I think in the final declaration, it appears as if the amount that was listed in the budget of $56,914,364 as current revenue, based on the different calculations, actually should be a number that's more in the range of $56,503 and $167. Excuse me, 56,503,167. You'll find that that is a net difference of 411.97, if I'm correct.
411,197.
Excuse me.
411,197.
411,197. That being said, the new net revenue would be adjusted, would need to be amended by council officially to $65,096,508. Now, with that amendment, as such, of a reduction in revenues, we would also have to find that we would be required to cut $411,197 from expenses. This is for council understanding as far as where we are as a county. Okay, so that's one area where we look, where we see that we have a shortfall in revenue today. Second item on the agenda is from very discussions we've had, primarily with Mrs. Laura Hurley and Mr. Bob Taylor, in reference to the request that was made in this year's budget for $750,000 to be granted as one-time only revenue for the Wicomico County Board of Education. I think Mr. Taylor has been very thorough in reviewing Maryland statute. According to Maryland statute, the $750,000, if we were to simply agree to put that in one-time only funding, we could come under very, very serious scrutiny with the state of Maryland as far as violating state statute. The state would probably consider that an increase in maintenance of effort. It would not be allowable as a one-time only. Primarily, the reason behind that is the fact that the state requires that one-time only expenditures or funding requests be approved ahead of time by March 31st, formally through documentation from the executive branch as well as the Board of Education to the state of Maryland for them to either approve or disapprove those expenditures. So that being said, I think the prudent measure on the part of this council would be to strike that $750,000 from the one-time only category. Discussions that have been held in reference to that would be a recommendation to transfer $500,000 of that $750,000, keep it with the Board of Education as maintenance of effort. So the council would see an increase of $500,000 to the maintenance of effort for the Board of Education, which we would be responsible for, as you know, from state formula year after year. The additional $250,000 would simply revert to the general fund, as the council would apply to other departments if we so choose as a recommendation to the executive, or it would be something that we would recommend to go into undesignated fund balance. So those are two, I think, of the primary issues that we're concerned with today to help lay the ground rules for where we are from here. I did the math, but I think what we should do, we are going to be okay, but with all of this minutia of changes and alterations as a whole, I think we're going to be okay with the budget as far as where we're headed. I don't think there's going to be any need to adjust any tax rates or anything to that effect. So from here, knowing those two standards initially, we then will go to the discussions of any departments specifically where we want to see increases to those departments. We want to maybe make recommendations for increases to those departments, or where we might want to see cuts in particular departments. Any council members want to start off with any particular items they'd like to address?
Well, I think probably the easy one is the 213 from Warwick that Worcester County, we're kind of tied with Worcester County on.
Okay.
So, to make sure we're in line with Worcester County in terms, so just, they gave us 2 budget submissions, stick with their initial budget submission and not their additional $213,000. I think we're good with Worcester County if we do that.
So the others, what you're saying is that if we were to approve the 213, then Worcester would then have to re-review their numbers as far as their budget is concerned.
Yeah, other students would pay more.
Or the students would pay more. Any comments in reference to
That
this?
was 213 even?
We'll assume that now. It's a work session. Numbers, we could fine tune that later if you'd like. That's been one recommendation to cut the 213 that was originally recommended for additional increase to Warwick. Any other suggestions here? We'll do primarily cuts first, and then we'll do what we'd like to consider as recommendations for additions.
I guess the 30,000 for Station 13.
Can you get your mic up there, Joe?
Say the 30,000 for Station 13.
Okay.
That was from the sinking fund?
Yes.
Okay. I would suggest that while we're making these recommendations, either way, that if there's any extreme opposition to any of this, that would be a good time. This won't be a final vote, of course, it's only a work session.
This is when we scream.
But
Right?
this is when you, yeah. This is when we put the gloves on. Let's take them off.
The airport budget, and I think maybe Mark wants to address it. He's probably
No.
been into it a little bit more than me, but
If you want to take the arrows, that's okay.
that's fine. That's fine. I mean, I think everybody's going to have their opinion on this one, but the airport's always been an enterprise fund, and I know they're doing good work out there. I'd like to see it remain an enterprise department. So with $350,000 go to it. What I'd like to see us do is take that money I think there's some disconnect there. I've seen, the airport manager on TV saying that we're gonna build a new restaurant next year. Talking to Wayne at the last meetings, no, we're not gonna build a new restaurant. I really don't think there's a lot of connection of what really is going on out there. And if they come up with something that has merit in the coming year, that a project that they can convince the council and the county executive that'll work, we could help fund them out of contingency if we have to, or if we needed to. But right now, I think that's money that's being put in basically is operating capital. We haven't been funding the airport for operating. This isn't capital expenses, it's just operating, according to Wayne, so I'd like to see that removed.
The full amount? The full amount, Joe?
Yes.
And that number was?
Is it 350, wasn't it?
Okay.
All right. Now you can scream, John.
Any comments on the left side?
Now, can we ask the executive's office to speak on this, John, at this time, or is it strictly council?
Let's do council comments first. I'd
Okay.
be willing to entertain that.
All right, well, our representatives from the airport, of course, what I would like to see with these cuts is the people whose departments we cut to defend these cuts, which we are not doing at this point.
Wayne was here Tuesday,
Well,
we talked about it.
yeah, I know
He
Wayne,
talked about it.
I know Wayne talked about it, but Wayne did not have to defend it, of course, at this point. The reason that we have this $350 initially was because we had to set up the fire station. And it was set up last year, and there were offsetting costs out there. So we don't need the 350 for the fire station at this point. However, as an enterprise account, and Joe, you're absolutely correct, it should cover itself as far as expenditures go. Of course, we do have enterprise accounts that do not in the system. But when we look at enterprise accounts that are doing well, we look at the Board of Education, or I'm sorry, not the Board of Education, but Parks and Recs, and we look at the landfill. And these enterprise accounts are doing well, but we support the Parks and Recs with funds from the county, even though they do generate income for the county. Now, the potential for the airport is tremendous. However, it's not done on an annual basis. We're looking at jobs, and we're looking at a lot of jobs down the road. And we're looking at high-paying income jobs that are coming into the airport. And if we'd like to discuss this with the airport manager and the executive, I think it's worthwhile. However, I think she did talk about this 2 months ago when she was before us, that the jobs that we want to bring into the airport are generally airplane mechanics, people that work on airplanes. We want jets in here because they're corporate people, and we want to build hangars, and we want to build an infrastructure around drones. We want to see other companies come in that are using the airport facilities like the ones that we already have out there. If we stop this process, and we're in negotiation with these companies right now, but we're looking at a year or 2 years down the road, so we have to have a little bit of foresight, and we have to support the airport with these resources up until that time. If these people that we're negotiating with at the time say, well, you know, here they are pulling back their resources, then I'm afraid that they're going to say, well, you know, maybe Wicomico County and maybe Salisbury is not progressive enough, maybe they're not interested enough in seeing the future of their airport come forward. And these are not just 1 or 2 jobs, these are hundreds of jobs that they're looking at, that they're in negotiation with. Now, you know, you talked about taking them, if it was necessary for operational cost to look at it at a later time because we needed more funding for it, you could always come back to the council and say we need more money for operational costs. But let's leave it in the budget at this point. Let's not go ahead and take it out and strap them and feel like they're restricted so they can't go forward in their negotiations. And other companies who are looking at us outside of Wicomico County are thinking about moving in here, who again, we are negotiating with, are saying, well, you know, here we are, we're cutting our budget, we're really not interested in being progressive.
You know, John, most of what you said has merit, and I agree with you. However, every department, you know, budget-wise, for a number of years, what they come in front of us for, they have reasons for wanting the money. What we're seeing here is just $350,000 submitted to this budget just for operational costs. No, it's not spelled out what it's really going to be used for. I'm not contradicting the fact that maybe at some point the airport doesn't need to be funded, some from the county, if they have a meritable project that needs to be done. This is just putting money in a pot and saying it's there if you want it. And let me finish.
Okay.
You know, you said you had the money in there for the fire department, so it wasn't needed. So you're going to go ahead and just put it in and let somebody use it for whatever. I don't have a problem with funding the airport if they have a project that needs to be done. But this is just an operational thing that, you know, that there's no list of items. You know, when the Board of Ed or other departments come in front of us, they have what they want. It's not spelled out.
Well, and I disagree with you. I think it is spelled out. It's spelled out, but very basically. And if we need to have, again, if we need to have the airport people come in and defend this cut, I think it's worth coming into it, but I don't think you can just cut them because you want to cut them.
And if I recall, Wayne was saying at the last meeting, and correct me if I'm wrong, that they could really get by without this. They could use it or not use it. Is I right or wrong there?
Sure.
Yeah.
Well, I'm sure all the departments can get through without any, with cuts that we make on.
Is that a motion?
Yeah.
What was that? I missed that.
You wanted to know if it was a motion. You know, it's like saying, well, let's go ahead and cut them 5% across the board. We don't care. And they'll figure it out themselves. And of course they can figure it out themselves. And that's what we're doing basically here. We're saying, you know, let's go ahead and cut them 5% and, or 3%, and let's not have them defend themselves. And I don't think we should do that.
I think in the past year, you know, we've heard enough, you know, in the media about things they want to do, and I understand that. But to just put this money in and say, here it is, without any kind of outline of what it's really going to be used for, is irresponsible on our part.
And
Well, I just, you know, I hate
Grab
to,
the mic,
this is a department that's in transition right now. And I hate to hamstring a department that hopefully, I mean, we all want it to succeed and be a true enterprise fund, so we don't have to fund it. But I feel like we're expecting that, we're asking that, but then to go and hamstring them by taking away operational money. We're not talking about money for potential projects. This is just operation of the airport. And so I think it's a wrong move to take this away and still expect them to succeed. Because next year when they're here and they haven't made good progress, we can, the council would have to take the blame for that if we're taking away the money that's going to help them succeed.
Yeah, this brings up a good point that Mr. Taylor brought to our attention within the last week, and that is the council in approving funding can put stipulations on that funding, Mr. Taylor. So we, in a sense, if we would want to keep this $350,000 in the budget, we could put some type of stipulations on what we wanted to see if Donovich would come to us with an explanation of what the funds would be used for.
Generally, what you're saying is correct. You can put conditions and restrictions on the expenditure of appropriations.
Okay.
There are certain limitations. I don't think there are any that would be applicable in this particular instance, but, you know, that's just off the top of my head. So that would be possible to do something like that, yes. Now, the specifics of it, we'd have to talk about, I guess.
Okay. So I think that's what Mr. Holloway's concern is, that he wants to see more specifics on how it's going to be addressed. or
Well,
spent.
that's true, and you know, Matt, we're really not taking anything away from them but not putting it in the budget. They haven't had it yet. So, I mean, you know, it's being proposed to give it to them. And, you know, they've operated for a number of years, you know, as an enterprise fund, and I'd like to see them continue that. And funding them basically pulls them away from being an enterprise fund.
I think part of where this is that there's been so much lack of maintenance at the airport over the last few years that we're trying to help them get back on their feet. I'm not advocating one way or the other. It's just how I see the position of the airport. It's the fact that you know, there's been deferred maintenance and deferred maintenance and deferred maintenance that unfortunately, as Matt said, it's in transition where we're trying to compensate for what's been left behind so many years.
But that's in the capital budget though, and we're not talking about projects. You know, I mean, the capital stuff we've approved. You know, it was a drone facility. We've done a lot of stuff where we've said, yeah, this is this is the day-to-day running of. You know, I mean, we're essentially subsidizing the airline tickets of people that fly out of there.
Well, some of operating can be minor capital.
Yeah, that's not necessarily true either, Mark. You know, the operating budget has suffered at the airport at the same time as the capital projects have for 30 years. We just haven't built the airport or developed the airport like it should have been developed.
Yeah, perhaps. Well, okay. So obviously there's strong opposition to the 350. Would you be willing, I mean, do you support the whole 350 being given to them, or, you know, 200? I mean, I guess what's your position, Matt?
I'd prefer to leave the full
The
350.
Full 350?
Yeah, I would.
Okay. All right. I'm okay with what Joe suggested, so,
All right, I think
well,
we've heard what the council's opinion is on this. It will come to vote later. I would suggest, Mrs. Hurley, that you contact Ms. Veach and ask her to please get us an itemization of the 350, so it's a little clearer to the council exactly what they're looking for.
Sure.
So that's on the maybe list, is that?
It's on the main list. Any other recommendations as far as cuts?
$300,000 for sheriff's cars.
You're looking for 300,000 the sheriff? Anything specific in that, Councilman Davis?
That's for cars, and I got a problem because, I mean, for the last 2 years, they came to us wanting to replace cars on the road with 200-some thousand miles, which I have no problem with, but now you want to buy cars just to get the resource officers to park in front of the school to project an image. Now you're gonna go and give them cars, and then you're gonna go back and neglect the road cars again.
Any comments? I would only say that, you know, we've had discussions over the last couple of years with Sheriff Lewis that he would have to replace 12 cars a year, pretty much for the amount of mileage that they're putting on them every year. It's been a calculated process, I think, of what his requests have been. If he does those cars and he chooses them to be, you know, at the resource officers or anywhere else, the one thing to keep in mind is that it is replacing a vehicle that had 200 and some thousand miles on it.
No, they're not saying replace, they're adding to, they're not replacing any road cars.
But this will allow them to get,
These cars aren't even qualified to be road cars. They're less performance cars.
Well,
They
they
don't
could-
even have the equipment that a road car has in it.
I understand what you're saying, that they may not be fully equipped to do what the daily road car might do, but they would still be a vehicle that would be available to any of the deputies should an incident occur. If you look at the courthouse downtown, there's about 3 cars that look like they're from 1968 parked there, and those are deputies who are assigned to the courthouse. Those cars sit there, but those cars are old and they have a lot of mileage on them, and I think that, you know, I would rather replace them with a less expensive vehicle to sit there, knowing that that vehicle could go out on the road if necessary, but at
It's
least.
not, they're not using them for patrol, John. These cars are being used for the SEROs that go from home to the schools. These aren't patrol cars. They're not even equipped with the equipment of a patrol car, so they're not gonna be able, he's not replacing, he's adding to the fleet.
Right.
He's adding these cars to the, he's not replacing the road cars.
Well, I think, and I don't know, and we could get into further discussion, or again, we could have Sheriff Lewis try to reemphasize what the purpose is, but I don't think they're adding to the fleet, because cars will be removed.
But
These
you're-
cars that have
okay.
220,000 miles on them will be taken off the road.
But they're not, you're removing a road car, and when you're replacing it with a car that isn't a road car.
Yeah, it's a valid point, but I'm not the one to answer that. Sheriff Lewis could answer that. I know the captain's here today.
Well, I asked the question, I'm looking for the email, because it wasn't answered. I was asking the question if they would, what was it, 8 cars?
They want eight.
If they could cut back to 5 and do the proper car with all the equipment. Or 6 cars, the difference in the price.
So you're talking about maintaining the funding, but just making a request of the
Right,
type
for
of
a
vehicle
fleet,
we
for
should.
the- like they've been doing for the years.
You were okay with that?
Yeah,
weren't you?
they're replacing the cars on the road, instead of just adding cars for
Yeah.
the
But
drive
there
back and
was- but
forth.
there was a big difference in the, there was a big difference in the cost.
It was 19,500.
Captain,
Yeah.
would you be in a position to discuss that?
Yeah, I can at least correct you on a few things.
We don't need correct.
Good morning.
Good morning.
For the record, just state your name.
Captain Todd Richardson, Wicomico County Sheriff's Office. Just real quickly, any cars that we get, they'll be replacing cars. We're not adding to the fleet. What we were trying to do is move the school cars down to replace the courts and take care of an entire division and get them back up and running for 5, 6, 7 years without having to worry about that division. But every car that comes in, one car will leave the sheriff's office. Where that car is plucked from and they're moved around is a day-to-day thing.
Depends on which ones broke down.
Correct. I have some 05s that I will probably keep and deadline some 09s because they're higher mileage. The vehicle's been in a different assignment. It's been doing well. Some vehicles just do well some e-transmissions right and left, and those are the ones that'll be deadlined. But we have no intention of expanding the fleet.
And the email did say that Sheriff Lewis sent us, should we pull a resource deputy from the schools to handle routine calls? His or her patrol unit is fully equipped with emergency equipment.
Yes.
It just lacks
Lights,
the
siren,
right.
what it lacks is a radar unit,
stop sticks.
in-car
Yep.
camera, stop sticks, a weapons vault, that type of thing. You also, as part of us trying to lessen the cost of our capital to protect the resources and deputies that we were asking for, that's why we reduced our capital by $160-some thousand, was in the hopes of keeping those deputies as a primary focus, but not abandoning our fleet replacement program. So we still will remove 8 vehicles with 8 replacement vehicles. Council Holloway, your point of a fully equipped vehicle, if we were going to a fully equipped, we would also then be going back to the Ford Explorer Pursuit package, which is considerably more. I worked the numbers after watching your session the other day, and for 6 fully equipped would cost $44,000 more than the 8 that we projected in our budget.
I personally would like to see a $37,000 vehicle parked at the school than a $57,000 vehicle parked at the school.
I'd rather see a fully equipped car being replaced, just in case, okay, if someone needed to use a car, that a road guy needed to use a car, he could go get one of these cars. Every car is equipped with all the equipment.
But you are going to have cars sitting at the schools, and you are going to have cars
But then
sitting
you
at
can
the
take those
courthouse.
older cars with the 200,000 miles and sit them at the school. Why are you gonna sit a brand new car at a school when you got guys on the road with a 200,000 mile car?
Well, for the most part, our road patrol is actually, with the purchases over the last few years, is in pretty good shape compared to some of our other divisions. Primarily, nothing older than 2011 is on the road, with the exception of a couple of supervisors and sometimes someone who's not producing as well as others. One of the other problems with our fleet is we have 39 cars that are 12 years or older, and we're trying to reduce that number on a year that we're really not concentrating on fleet, we're concentrating on deputies.
And I think too, if at some point in time we had completely, if at some point in time we completely replaced every single vehicle of the sheriff's department, you would have to have 10, 15 cars sitting. And I would, again, want those to be a less expensive vehicle.
And this is what we're looking at, is trying to reduce the overall cost of individual divisions. We're not putting our detectives in fully functioning police cars, we're putting them in detective cars. But yet, our detectives end up in bank robbery pursuits. It's just not ideal, whichever way you do it. But the idea of putting every vehicle we buy being a fully pursuit qualified, 100% equipped, I don't think you want to see that sitting at the courts nor at the schools. This purpose was to address an entire division for many years to come and not have to worry about maintenance for that division. These vehicles will withstand the 3-year, 36,000 mile warranty without a problem. We've already checked our average mileage. So the day these vehicles go into the service, they're going to be, other than normal maintenance, are going to be zero cost to that division. We've addressed patrol. What's actually at the schools now will move down to the courts to try to address some of the junkyard that's parked out in front of the courts, basically. And like I say, we have no intention of expanding the fleet.
Joe, you want to say something?
You were talking about some of the equipment. Is that, any of that equipment transferable? You know, like the weapons lockers and the radar units and things like that?
If you transferred it to a comparable vehicle, the thing is when these vehicles slowly make their way past road patrol, past civil, down into the courts or whatever, everything is computerized, and everything has a shelf life of about 5 years. Laptops that are 5 years old are not real good laptops. It's the same way with radar units. They're computers. Our cameras are computers. Everything's run through the computer system now. So to take a vehicle that's ready to be replaced and think that we're going to salvage any of that equipment, it's just not going to happen. we're replacing cars that are 12 and 15, 13, 14 years old. So that equipment is 12 or 13 years old. And most of them, by then, the radar unit has been, taken out. The camera systems that were in the 2008s that we got when Sheriff Lewis first came in, we've had to take all of them out and replace, well, they weren't replaced, they were replaced by
So
new
you're
ones.
saying it's not replaced, it's not transferable?
Not with the lifespan we're getting on these
Okay.
vehicles.
All right.
Thank you, Captain.
Well, like
Oh, sorry.
Mr. Davis, I think, he doesn't have an issue with the funding. I think his issue, I'm gonna speak for him.
It's been the cars.
More about how it's being done.
So, just you saying you don't have any cars on the road with 200,000 miles?
No, I'm not saying that at all. I'm saying we have,
Road patrol.
road patrol. I can tell you that my oldest patrol vehicle is a 2007, and they are with supervisors. But the bulk of my patrol is 2013 or newer. When you talk about vehicles out there that are these highest mileage, a lot of them are civil deputies who put on a lot of miles all over the county every single day, but they're low-intensity miles, so they've managed to stay around a little bit better. But what we will be replacing will be high-mileage, old vehicles, and everything gets moved down the staircase.
Well, I think maybe part of the issue that we're having here is that, as you recall, last year, it was 15 cars in the budget, and we approved 10 and not 5. We got a little bit of flack for that. We're, saying, oh, there's a lot of old cars being, we have to have these new cars because we have old cars on the road. And so that, so we're like, all right, well, let's focus on that this year. And then we get, that was kind of the thought, like, all right, we'll give them next year. And then we get kind of a different request this year and saying, well, now the old cars on the, there's not that many old cars on the road. I mean, so is,
I just told you there's
Yeah, no,
39 old cars on the
yeah,
road.
well, I mean, when we think of, us civilians, when we think of the road, we think of the people who pull us over and give us tickets, or, the ones that, the ones who are, responding to emergencies and things like that. So, I think that's part of the disconnect is that, we kind of had the impression that there was a real need for, to replace those regular patrol cars.
The need still exists. We're not denying the need at all. If, on a perfect situation, we would replace a car every 5 to 6 years, which means we would be in front of you for 12 to 15 cars every year. Unfortunately, our need this year is manpower. And when we presented our budget, we did it in the hopes of maintaining that manpower while not completely abandoning keeping our fleet modern. We prioritized with manpower first, cars second. I think we did a good job with cutting our overall capital to help pay for the deputies that we're requesting. I think $160,000 deduction, but still keeping some cars in our capital. It's a management move on our part. We've been managing a failing fleet for, Sheriff Lewis and I for 12 years together, and it's slowly coming around, but it's far from fixed.
Any other questions? All right. Thank you, Captain. Any other recommendations?
I know Larry, he's not here, he's at the doctor's office. He had mentioned something about $20,000 for uniforms and roads. I think we cut that last year, so
Okay.
I'd be remiss not to bring that up.
Any discussion on this? Okay.
I have something that bothers me a little bit, and I've forgotten where I found it, so help me out if you can. The county is requesting for the fire department 3 new hazmat units. 3 years ago or 4 years ago, we didn't have a hazmat unit on the Eastern Shore. It came from Baltimore. The city of Salisbury has a hazmat unit now, and now you would think that would be adequate since 3 years ago the hazmat unit came from across the bay. So 1 hazmat unit should be okay, but they're requesting 3 more hazmat units. You have training with it. These units cost $4,500 apiece, I think, is what was recommended.
Decontamination
but we're adding hazmat units. Just uniforms. They are.
They support the city's hazmat.
Okay, but don't the hazmat, I'm sorry, am I out of line for doing this way?
That's how we've got to air it out, John, in order to understand.
Okay. Doesn't the hazmat unit itself have the decontamination uniforms with it?
So we pay the city of Salisbury a stipend for the hazmat services they provide. They hold the unit. It doesn't make sense to have multiple units. What the volunteer companies ask for is they have decontamination units that they manage, that join, that follow the hazmat, the city of Salisbury hazmat truck. And those uniforms, sort of like body armor for police, have an expiration date on them. They need to be replaced every so often. So when the volunteer firefighters came before us and requested this, it's 3 stations that have these decontamination units. So they're not hazmat units. They're not responding separately to hazmat situations. It's still the city of Salisbury. It is the decontamination of all firefighters involved in responding that the county decon units attend.
And prior to requesting to this, prior to this request, how was it done?
They have units. It's just the clothing expires, and they need new uniforms to go with these decontamination.
Well, this is a new request, though.
For this year, it's like replacing fleet. You know, you're replacing. And if we got into the weeds of each fire department's budget, we would see they're replacing air tanks. They're
But
replacing.
this has never been requested before.
I don't know how they afforded it the previous time. I don't know how they originally got, and it would be helpful to have somebody from the Volunteer Firefighters Association. What I am aware is these are decontamination units for 3 specific entities that have volunteer fire departments that have these, and it is to replace all the expired or expiring parts of these decontamination units.
But it's not a recurring request, as in it's
It
not
is-
going to be next year.
Correct.
But
Well,
it-
that
but
is
it may
true.
be
This
in
is a
5
one-time.
years.
Yeah, they do have a
Yes.
shelf life.
Yeah, but
like-
maybe in 5 years
Like
it might be.
Bulletproof Vest.
And,
have a
and
shelf
again,
life.
I'm not sure what exactly that shelf life is. I'm going from memory because it's been early March when we met, and I feel like it may be 5 or 6 years. They may have taken it beyond that, but I'm not certain, and I think we could get that information for you if that would be helpful.
Thank you.
Yeah, in the budget, there's 3 hazmat trailers, $7,000 each. There's also $6,000 blanket grant. What would that be? Without, I don't want to put you on the spot.
Yeah, I would have to see the budget detail. Yeah, okay, we'll look into that. I believe that's something we've offered every year. I don't think it's something new.
I just was making aware that if we're referencing hazmat expenses, it's more than just 3 trailers. There's also this one $6,000 blanket grant.
Sure.
Which maybe we would want clarification on that, John. There's also under capital expenses, a replacement emergency management division utility truck for $62,000. That the truck will be, it's one of 2 that will be utilized by 3 departments, hazmat technicians for on-call, 24/7 responses. I'm not sure if it's specifically, that $62,000 appropriation specifically for a hazmat vehicle, but that's, the definition seems to suggest that. Anything else, John?
No, thank you.
Thank you very much.
No problem.
We'll put that on there as a hold, John, for you.
Thank you.
So that, and then once we get the clarification for the next meeting, then we can, on the blanket grant, the truck and the trailers, then we'll re-review it. Any other?
What about the 25,900 for SWED's increase? Just keep them at level funding,
What's the amount?
25,900.
And you're suggesting that be cut?
Yeah, we would just give them level funding from year to year.
Any comments from
On the left.
Okay, it's on the list. What else we have?
I guess maybe there's some clarification that's needed, but I think when Wayne was before us on, was it Tuesday? In response to a question, he said that in the executive's office, the public information officer position at $37,829 wasn't filled and didn't have plans to be filled. And if that's the case, I'd take that out of I recommend taking that out of the budget. But is that correct, or?
Not until we used part of that money when Weston came on board. So part of that money has been used within salary within the office. But it's our hope this year to go ahead and get the part-time person.
Okay, all right.
We use one every year for going to budget, writing our budget message. We use a public relations person to help write the budget message. And that has helped a great deal when we go to New York to presenting ourselves at the best level. It's been running about 15,000. We'd like to be able to pull us some more use of that person this year. Fit.
All right.
Yeah, we've been dealing with public information officer budgeting for many years. And it goes back 8, 10, 12 years as to whether or not a public information officer was, that was when Rick Powell was in office, whether or not that was an expense that the county needed.
So there is the intention of getting a public information officer this year?
Yes.
All right.
Anything else?
Sticking with the executive's office, the 4,200 for the billboards, I'd be okay with cutting that. Just throwing that out there.
Any comments from council?
I have a question. Is that a grant match for the billboards?
It's not, we're offered that price, $300 a month for that. That was something that the governor wanted to get out, his message of open for business.
Okay.
They're the ones that brought the idea to us. We presented, we filed the budget, we filed the governor request on that.
Right.
If you'll notice, we changed your hire, that was another part of it came into effect. What he's got planned for the second 4 years, I'm not sure. But, I personally like to keep it in there only because, I know it's hard to say with that particular billboard about this job, about that. But going to Mako and going out, you hear a lot about that billboard from a lot of people that talk to us and, different election officials throughout the state to see that and comment on it. At our Mako meetings or Mako conventions, that type of thing. So, it would be considered what I would call institutional type ads, which is constantly out there in front of them. And while we're talking about that, the open for business, right now we have part of our staff is in Nashville, Tennessee. And part of that is becoming, these companies that we're working on for the airport right now are seeing that, knowing that we're trying to move forward with Black Hawk. And I think it's just a good thing to be out there and let people know that we're trying to move forward. We have a lot of repairs to do, a lot of stuff to do.
Any other comments? Okay. Anything else looking to cut? Okay. Keep in mind, this is one work session. There will be other meetings where the council will be able to revisit any other cuts they'd like to see made or any other additions they might like to see made. Right now, we'll close the discussion on cuts that you would like to see, keeping in mind from what we initially talked about, the cuts which are giving us, which would give us anticipated revenues, which we would then look to put in the undesignated fund balance or make a request to other departments. Part of these monies would also include the fact that we have to make up for that revenue shortfall, $411,000. Keep that in mind. That's always going to be the case. I can give you the math later when we get through through the additions, if any, that council would like to see made. So we would go in that direction. Mark?
Well, the math that I've done, if, you know, leaving off the airport and the sheriff's cars and hazmat, you know, units, and not including taking out the PIO. So all the other things we talked about would be, what, $1,043,100. And it looks like we do 500 for the Board of Ed and 400 for the revenue decrease. That leaves us with a surplus of 131,903. So that's what we'd have to work with to add back anything or to reduce the overall budget level.
Okay. So we move down to department additions.
Clarification, are you still talking about full 300,000 on the deputies' cars?
Well,
Yes.
yeah, it's still, yes, yeah. Again, this is a work session.
But,
Right, I'm just trying to keep track of
yeah,
Okay.
how it works.
but I think that's on our, I think our maybe list, we would call it.
Yeah, that
That's-
wasn't in that 1 million.
Yeah, that wasn't in the 1,043,000, you know, that's, yeah, I guess that's to be determined later. I think that's what that is. Is that,
We'll create spreadsheets, Bob, and we can certainly give you a copy of this spreadsheet, which will show what all the cuts will entail, what all the additions will entail once we finish this. And then it's an Excel spreadsheet, so we can cut it out, move it in, and see exactly how to make the changes.
and for the public, I mean, obviously, if we make any recommendations to move money to any budgets except the Board of Education, that would have to go back to the executive's office to be added by the executive, so we obviously have to work with your office on that, so.
At this stage, then, we move on to any additions, any departments you would like to see, recommendations for additions, should we have the funding available.
So we had discussed the library, potentially looking to help with, was it healthcare costs in their budget?
Yeah, and give them money for a potential, you know, so they could cover a similar raise.
Yeah.
Would that be 100,000, is that what the?
Can we discuss that? I'm just texting Michelle to come up here, there's some things I gave her a package this morning on that, so you understand what's going on.
Well, let us review the package first, Bob, and like I said, this isn't going to be the only time we'll discuss this. Thanks. Mark?
I mean, I'd like to see more money going to roads for drainage issues and things like that. I'm hesitant to do that. I mean, we have to find other more offsetting money. I mean, if we're gonna do that, but if we can, you know, cut somewhere else, we can find some of these other cuts. I'd like to add, you know, 100 or even 200,000 for roads for drainage issues. Roads is the thing I hear about most of anything, so.
Any,
I'm going to support that. You know, I think and this is getting in, we're not in the management side of the county, you know, that's Bob's deal. But we talk about paving roads, and it's I've got a better understanding of how that works. When you do paving, it's not just paving. You don't call a paving crew and they come in and pave. There's a lot of work that has to be done before then. Sometimes new tiles put in, you know, repairs to the side of the road. We've also had a lot of problems with flooding and a lot of complaints about ditches. What I'd like to see is possibly enough funding go to the roads department to add another a road crew that's dedicated to that. And of course, that would have to be up to them how they would manage that. So I would support more money going to roads. That's the complaints I hear, and I agree with Mark, you know, of course, we're both in the rural areas, and we hear that a lot, so I'd like to see more money go into roads.
what is the amount we're considering, gentlemen?
I mean, for me, it all depends on if some of these other cuts can be made. I don't want to support recommending more funding, you know, taking money out of reserves or anything like that. We have to cut other parts from the budget to pay for this other stuff. So if that's the case, then, you know,
If we had it, what would
yeah,
we want to do?
yeah, I mean,
How much would you want to do if we had it?
I'd be up to 200,000 if we could make corresponding cuts, so. But,
Is that number
I mean,
something that the rest of the council?
Don't look like these storms can go away, we're gonna keep getting them. worse and worse.
Any other additions?
There was a request from the state's attorney's office for another position, $80,000 for a new attorney.
Yeah, I'd be okay with that if we can
That
find.
would be fight gun crime.
What was that number, I'm sorry?
80,000.
80,000.
That would be for the position plus, and include health benefits. Doesn't sound like a lot of money for hiring a lawyer.
Okay, so we have library, we have the roads, we have state's attorney. Any other additions?
And Board of Ed. But
Thank
Mark
you.
Mark had already mentioned that.
The Board of Ed, yeah,
This is on top of that, so.
the Board of Ed.
Yeah, but some of these other extra ones that, yeah, we'd have to, I think we'd have to cut some from the airport. Maybe, a police car or two, something like that. I mean, we'd have to work some of that stuff out because we're a pretty thin margin. And
No doubt.
it'd be nice to actually come in a little bit under the overall, cut something overall too.
Well,
I always like to do that, so.
Yeah, that's a good point. What we'll do is, I have an Excel spreadsheet I'm trying to do to track it. I'll send it out to each of the council members, and that way you could sit there and you could literally say, okay, well, if we cut this particular area by this much, that will allow so much for, what we might want to recommend in another area.
Sure.
Or if we reduce what we'd like to increase the recommendation for, that would offset what the cut might be, okay? So you can go back and forth through these numbers, and by the time it's done, it will give you a complete balance as to where we would be. And of course, we want to be either even, or we want to see a positive number in the reserves. Any other discussion on any items?
I have one suggestion, Mr. Cannon.
Yes, Mr. Chairman.
Yeah, I held this because I wanted you to clear the decks on everything else. But if you are in agreement or consensus on the 500,000 or any other number to add to MOE for the Board of Ed, I think Ms. Hurley should maybe communicate that to the board. The reason being that under the MOE appropriation, as I understand the state law, that has to be allocated among about a dozen or so different sub-items.
Right.
And each one has to have a separate amount in it.
Okay.
So I think they need the time to respond as to how they want that 500,000 plugged into those items. It shouldn't be hard because they already have a list that they've turned in for one-time requests. I would think this is something they could do in a couple hours.
So they can at least prepare for that, just in case, if the council makes that recommendation, the executive approves it, they'll already be ahead of the game.
Well, there's a Board of Ed meeting, I think, on Tuesday. I don't know the time of day, but I believe it's on Tuesday. It
All right.
may be the same time as the council
Thank you,
meeting.
Mr.
But
Taylor.
in any event, that gives them a time to do that. We're kind of getting down here to in the fourth quarter.
All right. Is
So
there
I
a
would
consensus
suggest
on the
doing that.
council as far as the 500?
Well, I've asked several times, and of course I was told by Dr. Hanlon it wasn't worth the trouble for the information on the travel and food expenses. And before we consider anything, I thought the council was hoping to get that information before we did anything as far as for the funding. And I guess, John, you said you talked to her and they said they were going to get that information together. Well, it's been several weeks now since we first started asking for it. And
Right.
that information's never come forward, so before we did anything, I would hope that we would have that information.
I understand. Keep in mind, this is a consensus only.
Yeah.
To give the Board of Education a heads up, that's all. Any other comments?
I'm okay with 5.
Yeah, I support what Joe was saying. Let's make sure that we get that as well.
All right, John? You okay with it? No? I didn't hear, I'm sorry.
Yes.
Okay, Larry?
That's what I did.
Well, just say yes, John.
We're looking to transfer the 500 to the Board of Education.
Yes, I'm okay.
And Ernie?
Yeah.
Okay, so we have a consensus, keeping in mind that it is an informal vote, and there's a few other steps this has to go through. Okay, thank you, Mr. Taylor. Any other council comments? Seeing none, all those in favor, entertain a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Meeting adjourned.